Gecko is Valorant's newest agent, and at a glance he seems overpowered. His wingman ability can plant and defuse a spike, and to make it worse, his ultimate is like a mixture of a Skydog and a Killjoy lockdown. The majority of people seem to think he's completely broken, but if you look at the gameplay we currently have, you'll start to notice a few weaknesses. By no means do I think he's a bad agent, but let's take a look at each of his abilities and break down what they do and why they probably aren't as good as you first thought. First is his signature ability Dizzy. You throw Dizzy up into the air and it'll flash anyone that sees. On top of that, you can't turn away from this flash to dodge it. If Dizzy can see you, you get flashed, whether you look away or not. And to top it all off, your teammates can't be flashed by this ability. Sounds busted, right? Maybe not. The full flash only lasts for 1 second, then it starts to fade and you can see again. This is similar to immediately popping a sky flash. Basically, it doesn't last for very long. That's not even mentioning the fact that unlike a normal flash, it doesn't actually fully block your screen, so you can still see things like the minimap, and in general, still have a decent understanding of your surroundings. Another point is that Dizzy has to be facing roughly in your direction to flash you. Like you can see in this clip, because Dizzy can't see that Killjoy, it doesn't hit her with a flash. As far as I can tell, it's around 180 degrees that this ability can see, because you can sort of tell here it shoots a flash at Sova, but for now it's hard to know the exact angle it can see you from. Dizzy has a half-second wind-up time between when you throw it and when it can start flashing people, and after that wind-up time, it'll only be active for a total of 2 seconds before falling to the ground, and that's assuming that it doesn't get shot, because I didn't even mention yet that Dizzy only has 20 HP, so even a classic can one-shot it. One of the awesome features with Dizzy and most of Gecko's abilities is that you can pick them up and reuse them, but that does also mean you need to be careful with where the ability lands, because if you throw it too deep into enemy territory, you have no chance of getting it back. Speaking of picking up his abilities, just so you understand how it works, it takes 2 seconds to pick up like an ultimate orb, and then there's a 10-second cooldown to use his abilities again after you pick them up. Also, those little globs on the ground will disappear if you don't pick them up within 20 seconds. The next ability is Mosh Pit, and I don't think people rate this ability too highly in the first place, as it will probably take a lot of team coordination and good timing to get a lot of value out of. Even though it covers a massive area, it takes 3 seconds for Mosh to explode after landing on the ground, which gives the enemy plenty of time to run away. Even though it looks like a Viper Molly, it only does damage at the very end, and if you stand in it before the explosion, you won't take any damage. You can think of the damage for this ability like a KO grenade or a Sova shock dart. If you're standing right at the center, it will deal 150 damage and potentially one-shot you, but if you're on the edges, it'll deal less. You can see this Omen here is even vulnerable, taking double damage, and yet it still doesn't take him out because he's towards the edge. I can see this ability being really good at taking out things like Killjoy's lockdown, and if you time it right, it can potentially one-shot someone defusing the spike, but it'll take a while to master things like that. Now onto the adorable little ability everyone is talking about, Wingman. Obviously he can plant and defuse, which is an insane addition to the game, but first I just want to focus on his recon ability to run around and concuss enemies. It has the same duration as Razor's Broombot, being 5 seconds, however it does move just a little bit faster, so it'll cover more ground. As for the stun, it lasts for about 2.5 seconds, which is on the short side compared to other stun abilities in the game. Onto his secondary function, an ability being able to plant the spike is obviously very powerful. Like you can see in this clip here, Sova is trying to shock dart under the impression there's still a player in that corner, when in fact there's no one there, and instead Gecko is able to stay back with the rest of the team and cover for Wingman. When it comes to planting and defusing the spike though, it's worth mentioning that it's not quite as good in clutch situations as we all initially thought. Take a listen to this clip from one of the developers who made Gecko.
In the 1v1 scenarios, if Wingman's all alone, he gets a little scared and he dies. So if it's ever a 1v1 and he's scared, he gets
This is
scared
so
and wants to go
adorable, bro. Poor guy.
Yeah, he gets a little too scared and dies, but that's only if he's a lost alive.
They tried to.
So if it's a 1v1 and Gecko dies, Wingman will then also die, so he won't be able to clutch the round and defuse the spike after everyone is dead, or anything like that. Also, Wingman only has 100 HP, so it's pretty easy to eliminate him. One thing I haven't seen people talk about yet either is that he sits directly on top of the spike when defusing it, which actually makes it easier to hit him through smokes. Instead of a player being in a giant ring anywhere around the spike, it's just Wingman sitting above it, and you'll know exactly where he is. Some people have been wondering whether or not Wingman will be affected by mollies, since he is pretty far off the ground. I'm going to assume that he can be, because in this clip you can see that an Astro Gravity Well is able to pull him off the spike. In theory, because he's far off the ground, maybe he can avoid Brimstone and Viper lineups or something like that, but we'll have to wait and see. Last but certainly not least is Thrash, Gecko's ultimate ability. So far I think I've been downplaying his abilities quite a lot, but when it comes to Thrash, I actually think she's quite strong. A 150 health, fast moving entity that you can control, which detains the enemies for 5 seconds if you manage to hit them. Then the key part is though, when Thrash either dies or hits an enemy, it turns into a glob on the floor for 20 seconds, which then creates a dilemma for the other team. They either have to sit there for the entire 20 seconds, making sure that you don't grab it again, which gives you plenty of time to rotate, or if they don't pressure it, they run the risk of you sending out Thrash again in the same round. I think the globs from all of Gekko's abilities are going to be really interesting in terms of creating little mini objectives throughout the round, and I can't wait to play him when he releases, as I'll probably be trying to insta-lock him like everyone else. Hopefully it doesn't sound like I think Gekko is terrible or anything, because I do think he'll be pretty strong, especially on release, but not quite as good as people seem to think right now. You have to remember all this initial footage shows his abilities being used basically in their best case scenarios, with enemies not countering them or trying to break them. But yeah, I watched the show match with Gekko a few times and wanted to point out some of the things I noticed. Also, in a few hours, creators will get early access to playing him, so once we've seen more people use Gekko, let me know how strong you think he is.